Okay, we'll get rolling here. So welcome back, everyone. Thanks for jumping on session 2 of our Sysmac Studio training webinars. Today, we will be covering the NA-HMI programming environment. So in Sysmac Studio, we can have multiple devices in our project, PLCs, HMIs, vision systems, robots, etc. So today, we will be adding an HMI to our project, and we'll be walking through the programming environment in Sysmac Studio for a basic HMI application. So our agenda looks like this. We'll touch on the hardware and software features of the NA-HMI. Then I'll get everybody to pick up where we left off Tuesday, and we'll add an HMI to our lift station Sysmac project. Now, if you were having some issues with your project, I did distribute one that you can use for today's class. Everybody should have the same tag names, and if your project was able to simulate, you should be good to go for today. Once we're in the environment, we'll go over pages and navigation. We'll add some pages to our project and set up our navigation. We'll go over how to link variables in the HMI and the PLC. Then we'll walk through the basic page development environment. We'll play with some of the more common buttons and features and images, gadgets, that sort of thing. Then we'll get everybody to simulate their HMI alongside their PLC, so you can have a live view of your ladder logic with a simulated HMI, and you can kind of see what it would look like in the real world. Then we'll add some data logging to our project. Now, if you don't have an HMI, the data logging will not work in the simulator, but I do have an HMI here, so you guys can add it to your project so you have a reference in the future, and I can show you what it will look like on my HMI. VNC we'll wrap things up with, so this is how we remotely control our HMIs over the Ethernet network. So the hardware features on the NA, so they come in 4 sizes, 7, 9, 12, and 15 inch. The bezel color, we have black and silver options. The function keys down here at the bottom, these are pretty handy. So these are buttons that are active all the time, and you can program them in Sysmac to do things. For example, reset alarms or turn on a pump or navigate to a certain page. They're fully customizable. Now, the touch technology we use is a resistive touch screen, single touch. So it helps when operators have gloves or if there's water droplets in the environment that can get on the screen. The peripherals on the HMI. So from left to right here, we have a USB port for programming. We have 2 USB slave ports. You can put a memory device in here if you want to save your trend data. You can also transfer programs to and from the HMI if you had to remotely update one. Number 3 here, we have a DB9 connector, which is RS-232. Then we have dual Ethernet. So you can span 2 networks if you need to. You can communicate with PLCs out of both ports. You can program through both ports, and they can be on unique subnets if necessary for your application. Number 5, micro SD card slot. Actually, it's a full-size SD card slot. And this is another memory option for program transfer as well as data logging. Then number 6 is our power connector, so positive, negative, and ground. Software features in the NA. So we run Windows CE at the core, which opens up a lot of media viewing capabilities. Now, I'll demonstrate some of these over VNC on a live screen, but we can do things like have spreadsheets viewable on our HMI. We can put our panel drawings in PDF format on the HMI. We can play videos. We can have pictures displayed on the HMI. So pretty handy, especially if you want to get into a nice graphical environment or throw your panel drawings on the HMI. There's automatic global variable linking. So what this means is when you create a variable in your PLC, you can basically auto-create all the variables for your PLC in your HMI in a couple of clicks because they're going to be in the same project file. We support VB.NET scripting. So if you had to do something a little more complex with your HMI, we do have a scripting environment that you can use. It has VNC remote access, so I'll demonstrate this near the end. It has something called an NJNX troubleshooter in it. So what this is if you were to connect Sysmac Studio to a faulted PLC and pull up the troubleshooting dialog, you would have details about the fault that had occurred. You would have suggested corrective actions. So we can embed this capability right into our HMI and potentially save your trip to site. Now, it's optional. You don't have to embed it. You don't have to activate it if you like those trips to site. And it supports parallel task execution. So it's a pretty fast environment to have your HMI running on. Okay. So if you haven't already, you can fire up Sysmac Studio and open up yesterday's project. Or if you decide to go with the one that I distributed, feel free to open up that one. All the tags will be the same. Everyone, another 10 or 15 seconds here to get their project loaded up. If you need any more time, feel free to shout out. Okay, so this is what our screens are going to look like when we're all done with them. We're going to walk through developing each one of them and setting up all of the buttons and graphics and animations, that sort of thing. So our main screen is going to have our start, stop, reset control on it. We are going to make some tweaks to our PLC because we can't directly modify an IO variable with our HMI. It would just be overwritten by the physical input. Then we have a set point screen. So this is where we'll make our start and stop set points available. We'll also put our trend on there so we can have that viewable. We'll have a help screen so we can have some data sheets, some manuals, and just for fun, we're going to throw a pizza menu on there for the night shift. Then we'll have our navigation screen. So this is going to be embedded behind all of our screens. So if you need to modify the navigation in the future, you wanted to add a screen for something, you only have to modify the background screen, and it will update all of the screens that are using that screen as a background. Okay, so I will get my Sysmac visible here for everybody. So we currently have our project. We've got our two programs, tank level, pump logic, and if we hit the drop-down menu at the top of Multiview Explorer, all we have is new controller 0. So that's the default name of the PLC that we added yesterday to our project. So what we're going to do to get another device in our project is up at the Windows menu at the top, there's a category called Insert. And we are going to navigate down to HMI, and we are going to select NA5 HMI. So the NA5 series are the standalone touch panels. The NA series is basically a software version of the HMI that you can run on your PC. But we're going to be working with the NA5 today. So I'll get everyone to click on NA5. And we can add a 12-inch V1 to your screen. The version isn't really important. I have 1.17 selected. Depending on the version of Sysmac you're running, you might not go up to 1.17. For what we're doing for simulating it, it's really not important. So just pick the highest version and we can work with that. Okay, so after 10 or 15 seconds, your HMI should be added to your project, and it will automatically navigate to it in the Multiview Explorer once it's been added. And it has a kind of a default name of HMI underscore NA5 underscore 0. So you can have multiple HMIs in your project if you want. Same with PLCs and other devices. Now we'll take a quick peek at some of the options available to us in the Multiview Explorer first. So if we expand configurations and setup, these are settings that are primarily pertinent to the hardware. So we have our HMI settings category. This is where you will configure your startup page, keyboard size, TCP IP settings, so your IP address of the screen. Port 2 by default doesn't have an IP address. It's just set up for direct connection with Sysmac, but if you needed to configure port 2, you could uncheck that, give it an IP address, and you'd be good to go. FTP, VNC. So we can do things with FTP like get our trends off the HMI remotely. versus, having to go to site and unplug your flash drive kind of thing. So the only change that I'll have everybody make is in our HMI settings under the VNC category. This is where we set up our VNC server. So those of you who aren't familiar with VNC, don't ask me what the acronym means, but it's essentially a remote access screen mirroring system protocol. And it lets us use pretty much any VNC viewer. There's loads of them. Most of them are free, and we can remotely view the screen and even control the screen on our HMI through a remote link if you wanted to, from your house kind of thing. So we'll enable the VNC server by checking off use. We'll stick with the default port. We'll change our mode to view and operate. So you have control whether it's a view only or if you want to have control available remotely as well. That may be a security concern kind of thing. So if we have that enabled, we do need to assign it a password. It's not too picky. I'm just going to choose admin as my password, and it's happy with that. If we wanted to restrict access a little bit more, we can enable registered logon. So you can specify IP addresses and MAC addresses that are permitted to access your HMI if security becomes a concern using VNC. Give everyone a second to do that. Okay, now down below the configurations and setup in our Multi-View Explorer, we have the HMI category. So this is where we'll do all of our page development. If we expand the pages category, we have by default page 0. If we double click on it, it's just going to open up our blank page, and our toolbox has now been populated with HMI objects that we can use. So the first thing I like to do when I'm programming an HMI is add all the pages I think I'll need and set up the navigation first. So we can do that as step 1. So in our Multi-View Explorer, if we right-click on pages, we can add a page. So I'll get everyone to add 3 pages to their project so that you have a total of 4 pages. Give everyone a second to do that. Now we're going to rename the pages. So starting with page 3, we'll right-click on it and choose rename. And we'll rename page 3 navigation. Page 2, we are going to rename, you can just hit yes on the pop-up that comes up. Page 2, we are going to rename help. Page 1, we are going to rename set points. And page 0, we are going to rename main. Give everyone a sec to catch up here. Good. So get everyone to double click on the navigation screen, and it will bring up a blank screen. Now, in our toolbox, how we do navigation in Sysmac is we assign an action to a button. So similar to how in the PLC environment, we had one contact and one coil, and we could choose whether they were a set or a reset or normally open or normally closed. In Sysmac, if we expand the button category, we only have 5 button options, and we can accomplish many different things with these buttons. So I'll get everyone to just drag the top button onto their screen. And you could just drop it somewhere in the bottom left. We'll shuffle everything around at the end. And I'll try to zoom in a bit here for you guys too. Now, when we double click on the button, our toolbox is going to change to the properties of the selected object in the edit pane. So the only thing we're really concerned about here is picking a color and a shape that you like. We can control font sizes, fonts, the appearance of the button. Is it a rectangle? Is it an ellipse? I'm going to stick with rectangle. But now when we decide what we want this button to do, we will assign an action to it. So in the top right-hand corner of the properties dialog here, there's a little lightning bolt with an arrow next to it that says go to events and actions when you click on it. If you're on a very old version of Sysmac, that might not be there, in which case you can access that from the view menu, and you can go to view, events and actions, and it'll bring up the same window here. So by default, it has no actions associated with it. So from this drop down here in the events and actions window, we can choose an action. So we start with the event that we want to tie the action to. So I'm just going to choose a click event. And now we choose an action when that click event happens. So from that drop down, you can see here we have 20 or 30 different actions that we can choose. So we do it this way so we don't have 20 or 30 different buttons to perform all of these operations. We have one button and we choose the action from a drop down. So show page is what we want, which is down near the bottom. It's all alphabetical. So I'll click on show page and I'll add that as an action to the click event. Now I do need to tell it what page I want it to show, which is the page name category here. So I'll start typing main and it should detect a page that starts with M and it will suggest main for you. So you can just hit enter, or if you want to just type main, that works too. Anybody having any issues accessing events and actions or adding an event and action? Okay. So we'll navigate back to properties. So if you just double click on the object again, it will bring you back to properties. There are also tabs at the bottom of the properties window or the events and actions window. If you're still in that section, we could navigate to properties that way. And now we can choose the text that's displayed on the button. So I'm going to use main as the text on the button. You can also double click on the text in the edit environment and type directly on it if you want to edit the text that way. As far as the font goes, this is pretty small. I'm zoomed in. You guys can likely tell on yours that this button would be a bit hard to read. So I'm going to bump the size up to, say, 25 to start. Maybe we'll go up to 30 since we only have 3 pages that we need to navigate between. I like to make it bold. And then we can also resize our button a little bit bigger by dragging the corner of the button. If we zoom out, that's definitely going to be big enough to be legible and big enough to also touch pretty reliably. So once we have our main button done, we can just copy and paste it 2 times because we need to set up navigation for 2 more pages. And it's easier now that we've kind of got the template with the font and the size and an action already implemented. So I'm just going to copy and paste this twice. And we can drag them roughly where they need to be. We'll align them after. Now the button in the middle, when we double click on it, all we need to change on this button is going to be the text, which will be set points. And then we can go into our events and actions. And if we expand the existing action, we can just change the page name to set points. Then we'll go to our last button, and you guys can probably guess this is going to be the help page. So you guys can change the text and change the action to bring you to the help page. Give everyone a second to catch up. If anybody needs some more time for that? I'll assume the silence means that everybody's caught up. So now we'll align these so they're not as scattered. So if we drag a box over all three of them, we will select all three of them at the same time. And then we can go up to edit. Sorry, right click on one of them and align, and we'll choose middle. If you choose the wrong one and it shoves them all on the wrong side of the page, you can just Control Z and choose it again. Then we can just nudge them where they need to be. I like to use the arrow keys, and we're pretty close there. So and again, if you didn't catch that, we're going to select them all, right click on any of the buttons and choose Align Middle. Now we'll go back to our toolbox, and to make this a little more aesthetically appealing, we're going to drop a background behind the buttons. So I'm going to go to the Shapes category, and I'm going to put a rectangle there. And we can just drag and drop a rectangle out of the toolbox, drop it on the screen, and then we'll double click on that rectangle to modify the properties a bit. So cornflower blue is our default color. I'm going to make this kind of a grayscale navigation pane, so I'm going to choose a gray color for mine. If you guys like cornflower blue, stick with it. If you want to make it lightning yellow, go right ahead. And once it's on our screen, we can just drag it where our buttons are and just have that box cover the buttons. Now, obviously, this is blocking the buttons currently, so like most HMI environments have, we can control the order of objects on the screen if we want to bring something forward or send it backwards. And we simply do that by right-clicking on the object in question, and we can say send backward. And we'll have to do it a few times here. You can also do send to back, and that will move it all the way to the back. So now that our navigation is done, any modifications we want to make to the HMI's navigation, maybe you want to change to cornflower blue in the future, you can do it from this page, and that will be reflected on all of the pages, because we're going to assign this page now as the background to all the other pages so that they all have the same look and feel for the navigation section of the screen. So we'll have to go to each page to set this up. So I'll double click on main first, and make sure you have properties selected on the right-hand side. And one of the options that comes up with just the standard properties is the background page. And if you just start typing navigation, it should autofill it for you. And then we'll go ahead and repeat that with the other pages. So, and you'll see as soon as you assign it a background page, it will show you where the objects from that background page are going to lie on your page. So since all of our pages are going to be the same size, we're not dealing with pop-ups or anything like that. This won't really be an issue, but it does give you a preview of where that's going to lie on the screen. So everybody can repeat that process for the set points and the help screen. Does anyone need any more time with that? Okay, so now we're ready to start putting objects on our screens that will interact with our program in our PLC. Because this is a new project, we haven't created any tags in the HMI, but if you recall from the PowerPoint, they're essentially in the HMI project. We just need to give them variable names that we can use in the HMI environment. So if everyone can navigate to configurations and setup, and then the second item down is called variable mapping. So if we double click on that, we will see all controllers that are in the project. Then we only have one, so we'll expand it, and then we'll expand the user variables. Now these should look familiar. You can see the tag name in the port column, but the variable column doesn't have anything on it. So we can call them whatever we want. If we had a custom naming convention that we wanted to use and it differed from the PLC tags significantly, we could call them whatever we want. But a quick feature that I like to use, and when you only have one PLC in the project, it's very handy. So if we just right click on user variables, we can do something called create device variable with prefix. And we will change prefix here to none. So if you had multiple controllers in the project and they were all identical, you would want a prefix so you could differentiate between them. We have one controller, so not having a prefix isn't going to confuse us when we're tagging things in the screen. It's just going to replicate the name of the tag in the PLC on the HMI. So once you've selected none, just hit OK, and it's going to add all of these variables to your HMI project. You may have noticed the exclamation mark next to alarm. So that is not a reserved name in the PLC, but that is a reserved name in the HMI. So we can just edit that tag to call it plant underscore alarm, and that should make that go away. So give everyone a second to do that. Does anyone need some more time? Okay. So now that we have all of our PLC tags in our HMI, we are going to navigate to our main screen, and we can start developing the graphics and the controls that we'll put on the HMI. So we'll go to our toolbox, which is just going to be a tab at the bottom on the right-hand side. And the first thing I'd like to do on the main screen is use a background image. So if we go to standard controls, there's an image item that we can drag out of the toolbox and drop onto our screen. And when we double click on the image item, it's going to bring up the image properties. And everyone should have received a Google Drive link prior to the first class. And what we're going to do is navigate to that folder that I sent you. So In the image file category here, there are 3 dots next to the drop down. So if we click on those 3 dots, it's just going to bring up a file browser. And on the desktop, you will find the student material. Mine's in a slightly different place here. So for session 2, we can go to HMI images. And we're going to grab it's got a rather funny name here, but it starts with 360. And if you're looking at the preview, it kind of just looks like dirt with some grass on it, which is what it is. So we'll enable that. And for the time being, we're just going to leave that at the bottom of the screen. We will be stretching it across the entire screen when we've developed everything else, but it can help with clicking on the wrong layer if we just stretch it over as the last thing we do. So we'll just leave that at the bottom of the screen for now. There is an option called lock aspect ratio if you double click on the image, and we want to uncheck that because the chances of this being the exact aspect ratio of our screen and the window that we're working with within our screen are pretty low. So we can freely scale it and stretch it and choose whatever aspect we want if we uncheck that. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is we'll use one of the built-in graphics for our ground tank. So if we scroll down to tanks in our toolbox and expand it, I'll get everyone to use the medium tank 3. And we can drag that onto our project and drop it. I'm going to put mine sort of on the right-hand side. I'm going to resize it just a little bit. But somewhere in there should work for you. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine or be the same size as mine. So we'll throw that tank on there. And then we'll go to the pipes category. And we're going to grab a pipe straight vertical. We'll drop that on our tank. We're going to grab a pipe 90-degree top left. We'll throw that on our screen. Then we're going to grab a pipe straight horizontal, put that on our screen. And now we can size these up to connect to one another. And eventually we will be putting a motor, or a pump, I should say, on the bottom of this pipe. But try not to rescale these at all. The edges won't quite line up if you rescale them. But line them up as best you can. Should look something like what I have on the screen here. Give everyone a second to do that. Again, the tank was in the tank toolbox, and it is medium tank 3. And the pipes that I'm using are down near the bottom, the straight vertical, the straight horizontal, and the 90-degree top left. So give everyone a minute to do that. Okay, anyone need some more time? Okay, so I'm going to close those categories. And the next object I'm going to put on the screen is this It's going to be a shape, and it's actually going to go behind our motor. And we are going to add an animation to this shape that will change color based on if our pump is running or not. So if we had a graphic of a red pump and a green pump, and you wanted to use those, we can set the images to switch based on a tag. That would work. But for this, to keep things simple, we'll just drop a rectangle right at the bottom of the pipe. You can center it with the pipe if you'd like. And now we are going to do something called an animation. So if you've worked on HMIs, you're probably familiar with animations. So to access the animations for an object, we can go up to View, and we can select Animations. And that's added another tab on the right-hand side of the IDE. So we now have our toolbox, our properties, our events and actions, and our animations. And when we click on an object with the animation tab open, it's going to let us assign an animation to it. So from the drop-down list, I'm going to choose Color Change Boolean. And we're going to want our off color to be kind of the same color as the tank, almost a gray. Oh, it's asking me for an expression first, I think. No, you can pick the color first. So I'm going to give it kind of a light gray, just like the tank behind it. And then for our on color, I'm going to leave mine green. If you guys desire different colors, feel free to use them. Now for the expression of our animation, so we can do things like if the tank level is greater than 55, that would be our on color. Anything else would be our off color. We can and or Boolean conditions together if we want. So we don't just have to pick a single variable for our expression. We could actually, even using brackets, get into multiple comparisons of variables or conditions to make this expression true. So the tag we want for our expression is when our pump is running, and I believe we called that motor, maybe start motor. Yeah, start motor was the tag in the PLC. Now, when this tag is true, this expression will be in its on color. When this tag is false, this graphic will be in its off color. So this will essentially be our run indicator for the pump. And we put it first just so it's going to be behind the pump when we're dropping the pump on top of it. We don't need to shuffle them back and forth to get the order right. Anybody need more time with the animation? Okay, so back in our toolbox, we'll go down to a different category now, which is the pump category. And pump 3 has a vertical outlet. So we'll grab that and we'll drop it on top of our rectangle that we just created on the HMI, and we can resize it to match up pretty close to the pipe as well as that rectangle. If you need to make your rectangle a little bigger to be visible behind it, you can go ahead and do that. So now I'm going to add two indications on the HMI. to indicate our alarm conditions. So if you remember from when we were programming the PLC on Tuesday, we had an overload signal from the motor, and we also had a low level switch in our tank. So what I'll do for those is go to standard controls. And if you had a graphic you wanted to use for this, of course you could. And I'm just going to drop a label onto the screen. So standard controls, label. And I'm going to call this LSLL for level switch low. I'm going to actually give it a background of red and a text color of black. And of course, we'll bump the size up a little bit and make it bold so it's a little more visible. And we can resize this to cover the text. And we'll throw that near the intake of the pump, since that's about the height it would be at in the tank. Now for this one, we're going to go back to our animation tab. And we're going to add probably the most common animation that you'll use on an HMI, which is the visibility animation. So again, when we have an expression, the object will be visible when that expression is true. The object will be invisible when that expression is false. So I'm going to use the LSLL tag, which is the digital input for our level switch. So when our level switch is triggered, we'll see that red indicator on our tank for the level switch low. Give everyone a second to add that animation. Then we'll copy and paste that level switch low label that we created. We'll drop it on our motor and we'll call it fault. Oops. Oh, yeah. So you'll need to resize it a bit so you can display that text, but call that fault. We'll put that right on our motor. And as you guys probably guessed, the expression that we're going to use in that animation is going to be motor fault. And that will be the feedback from our overload. Now, if we wanted to add a blinking animation to this, we could, if you wanted to kind of catch the operator's attention. A couple different options for animations available to you. So analog color changing, Boolean color changing, enabling, moving, resizing, that sort of thing. So does anybody need more time with those last two animations and objects on the screen? Okay, good. So now we're going to add a level indicator for our ground tank. So we'll go back to our toolbox, and I believe it's in gauges. Yeah, we could use a horizontal gauge and flip it vertically. The one I'm looking for is okay, yeah, so we'll grab the black horizontal gauge. We'll drag it onto our screen. So gauges, black horizontal gauge. We'll double click on it to bring up the properties. And up near the top in appearance is horizontal by default. And we can switch that to vertical. And now we can position this on our tank to indicate the tank level. I'm going to resize my tank slightly to accommodate this gauge. That should be good there. Now, conveniently, by default, these are 0 to 100, and our tank level is 0 to 100. If we wanted to modify that with custom minimums and maximums, we could. We could also control major and minor intervals. And we do need to add a tag to it in the properties window this time. And our expression is going to be the tank level scaled, which we created in our PLC. I'm going to change my pointer color to blue. If you want to leave yours red, go ahead. But this is a water tank, so I'll stick with blue. Okay, now we will create some buttons on the HMI for local control of the system. So you might be remotely viewing this screen from a different area. You don't have access to the physical start, stop, and reset push buttons. So we will add our own stop, start, and reset push buttons to the HMI. And we will have to add some tags in the PLC as well, because we, like I mentioned before, we can't write to a digital input. It will just be overwritten every scan cycle with the physical digital input signal. So I'll get everyone to navigate to their PLC quickly. We can just switch from the drop-down menu in the Multi-View Explorer to our controller. And in our pump logic program, we have 3 places where we're using those buttons. So if you're following me exactly, yesterday we'll be on rung 1, rung 2, and rung 5. So I'm going to go into my ladder tools. I'm going to grab a contact, and I'm going to drop it on top of all 3 of those signals, so it creates an OR condition. I also added this rung to my project after the class yesterday. It kind of dawned on me that we didn't do anything with our stop button. So rung 2 here is just the stop button will reset our run mode. I'll give everyone a second to add that rung as well to your project. So we're going to make 3 new tags. They need to be global variables because we need to use them with the HMI. So I'll call it HMI underscore start for the start signal from the HMI. We'll make it a global. Then for the stop, HMI underscore stop. And for the reset, HMI underscore reset.
Sorry, how did you get that? So what did you do? You dropped the input on the right?
To create the OR condition, do you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, so in ladder tools, I grabbed an input, a contact. And when you drag anything from the toolbox into your logic, if you drop it beside something, it will basically AND it with that instruction. If you drag it right on top of something, it will OR it with that instruction. So I dragged a contact right on top of the start push button, stop push button, and reset push button contacts in my program. Did that work for you?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. And like I mentioned before, we didn't do this rung yesterday. Kind of dawned on me after the fact that we need to stop this plant. So rung 2 here is dead simple. Contact, stop push button, reset the run mode bit on the right-hand side of the rung. So you can add that rung. And then rung 5 will be the reset button, or the HMI reset will reset our alarm. Anybody need some more time with that?
I do for rung 2, just a second.
Sure. So just kind of a refresher, to create a new rung, we can right click on the rung number, either above or below it. And there's an insert rung option when you right click on the rung number. There's also a rung in the ladder tools that you can drag and drop wherever you want in your program. Let me know when you're all caught up.
I'm sorry, but how do you get the HMI stop under the PLC?
So when you drop the contact in your ladder, and you type,
Oh, I see there's 2 contacts on rung 2, right?
yeah, so
Okay.
you'll,
Thanks.
yeah, so add one, and this stop PB exists already in your controller. And then the HMI stop is a tag that you're going to have to make.
Can you hover over rung 5 for a quick second, please?
Yep.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, is everyone good? Okay, so we'll go back to our HMI now, and you can click on any tab at the top that has the HMI environment. Back to my main page, the tab's open at the top. If you wanted to navigate through your multi-view explorer, you could drill back down to it that way as well. And now we can drop our buttons onto the screen. So there's a handy little time-saving tip that I'll get everyone to do here now. So go to your pump logic program, and we are going to undock this pump logic program. So we click up at the very top where the light blue tab is showing here. Click and drag away from the top. We can have this program in a window of its own. Now, if you had multiple monitors, this would be very convenient. I'm going to try and do it on one monitor here, so I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. But we'll select the main page, and we'll have our pump logic program undocked beside it. And for things like simple buttons that are just toggling a Boolean variable, we can actually drag the contact out of our ladder logic and drop it on our HMI programming environment. And it's going to create a button that's going to map that tag to that button. And if you haven't created the tag in your variable mapping, it will create the tag for you. So it's kind of a time saver in a situation like this. So I'll drag my contact out of my ladder logic, drop it on my HMI. I'll do the same with HMI stop and HMI reset. And once we're done with that, we can redock our pump logic program. Otherwise, it's going to always open up undocked. So if we click up at the top where it says pump logic program 0 and start dragging it, bring it into the middle of Sysmac, and there will be 5 little boxes displayed. When we drop it in the center box of those 5 boxes, it's going to return it to its native position. So now it's just another tab at the top. Anybody having any issues doing that? Okay, so we'll go back to our main screen now, and you guys can do your buttons however you'd like. Obviously, we don't want them to say momentary button, so we'll rename them all according to what they do. So there will be start, stop, and reset. And because they're all the same object, we can do mass edits on all of them at the same time. So I'm gonna change the text on them first, start, stop, and reset. And then to make them a little more aesthetically appealing, I'm going to select them all. And when you select multiple objects in Sysmac, any properties that they share between them, you can mass edit all of the selected objects at the same time. So these are all just momentary buttons. So when I change the font size, it's going to be reflected on all of them. When I change the style to bold, it will be reflected on all of them. And I'm going to make mine ellipses. And you can even resize them, and they will all resize together too. Yeah, that's good there. Okay, you don't have to do your buttons the same way I did mine. I'll give everyone a second to do that. If anyone's having any issues, you can go ahead and speak up. Okay, anyone need a little more time for that? Okay, good. So we are pretty much done with this page now. And if you remember, the very first thing we dropped on the screen was that picture of the dirt and the grass. So now is a good time to make that your background. So not a background image, but an image that's behind everything on your screen. So you can now resize your image object that you added to the available window. And anything you want to shuffle around, you're more than welcome to do so. I think I might make my buttons a little bigger. Now that I've zoomed out, I can see kind of how big they'll actually be. So I'm gonna move mine a bit, resize mine a bit. You can adjust yours how you'd like. Okay, anybody need more time with that? Good. So now the moment we've been kind of building up towards is we can simulate our HMI and our PLC at the same time, that we can see changes in our ladder logic, and we can utilize the objects on the screen that interact with tags in the PLC. So up at the top, we have simulation, but instead of the first selection, start NA simulator, we're going to go down to the very bottom and we're going to run it with the controller simulator. You're going to choose the PLC that you want to simulate. We only have one in our project. We'll click OK. And again, the first time you build it takes a bit longer than sequential times. So we'll let the simulator build. And this is really handy if you have two monitors. You could have your HMI in one, you can have your ladder logic open in the other, do some debugging. But what's going to happen here is when I navigate to the PLC, it's going to be just like last class, I should say. We're going to see the live view of the ladder logic in our PLC while we're simulating. And then a virtual HMI is going to pop up. Sometimes it's in a different window if you have multiple monitors. And anything we do on the HMI should be reflected in the PLC if that association is made. So I've got my ladder logic open here. I have my HMI just popped up in the other window here. So you can see the screen. We've got all our buttons. And we'll just as an example here, you can see HMI stop in the background. When I press the HMI button, you can see the contact close in my ladder logic rung behind it. Same with there's my reset tag that I created. If I press the reset button, you can see the logical flow in the PLC. So just like we had to do last class, we do need to give it a tank level and some set points to start. We will be making a page with the set points on it, so this will be a little easier in the future. We're also going to make them retained, which we didn't do on Tuesday because we don't want the operator to have to come and set new set points every time the PLC fires up. So I'll get everyone to just, if you have your watch tab on the bottom still, and you have the tank level raw in your watch tab, you can modify it here, or you could go to the tank level program and you could modify it directly from ladder logic. So I'm going to give my tank 50%, which is a value of 4,000. And for my high set point, I'm going to choose 75%. For my low set point, I'm going to choose 25%. And I'm just modifying these right in ladder logic. You could also put them in your watch window if you wanted to. And now we can use the HMI, our simulated HMI, to place the plant in run mode. So pressing the start button has put us in run mode. And our tank is in between our high and our low, so we can walk up the tank level raw value. It should kick in around 6,000, so I'll just do 6,100. That's started our motor. And on our HMI, you can see our graphic animation behind the motor has turned green, indicating our pump's on. And our level gauge is also traveling up and down with our tank level. Now, next class, we are going to make we're going to make this a bit easier to use on the next class. There's kind of some simulation logic that we're going to create so that our tank level will rise and fall autonomously, and we can watch our pump turn on and off without having to manually manipulate this set point. But you guys get the idea. We don't need to run through the whole project, but you know, if we triggered our level switch low in our logic, we'll see the animation for the level switch low become visible on our tank, and same will happen with your motor overload as well. So we'll come back to the simulator. We can close the window of the HMI, and that will shut both simulators down. Alternatively, there's a stop button down here at the bottom of the simulation pane you can click on. Okay, so I mentioned the retained variables for our set points. So that's something we didn't set on Tuesday. So in your PLC programming environment, if you navigate to global variables, double click on them, we have all the global variables we've created. And for the high set point and low set point tags, you can check off retained. And this will actually retain them both in your simulator, and it will also retain them in the PLC when this thing is actually running on a controller. So everyone can check those off, and that will just make your life a little easier when you're jumping in and out of the simulator. You don't have to fill in those set points over and over again. Okay, so now we'll do our set point screen. So we can navigate to it through either the Multi-View Explorer, or if you have the tab open still at the top, you can click on it. And what we're going to do for the set point screen is we're going to put our high set point and our low set point on this screen. And we're also going to drop a trend graph so that the operator can get an idea of what the levels have been like recently. He only really has an instantaneous view when he's looking at the front screen. So we'll go into our set point screen. We'll go into standard controls. We will grab a label, drop it on our screen. And then we will also grab a data edit and drop it on our screen. So we went over resizing and changing the color on labels before. For the data edit object, when we double click on it, in the properties, it demands a variable. By default, it's numeric, so that's good. I will let you guys proceed with this next page for a few minutes here. We're going to assign the high set point variable. We're going to label it high set point. Then we're going to basically copy and paste that whole thing. We're going to make a low set point variable, and we're going to assign the low set point tag to the variable of the low set point. So I'll let you guys take this one and run with it. I'll catch up in a minute here. So you guys go ahead. If you're having any issues, feel free to speak up. Anybody got any questions while they're picking away at it here? Good. Some of the properties we didn't go over that would be very useful in this scenario are the display format. We can choose how many decimal places we want. We can choose how many characters to display. Being that it's 0 to 100%, three primary and 1 decimal place should work perfect for us. Now we can also specify a minimum and a maximum value for these. So for the high set point, I'm going to specify a minimum of 50, a maximum of 100. For the low set point, I'm going to specify a minimum of, let's say, 15 and a maximum of 45. Just so the set points can't overlap that way, and they couldn't put in a set point that's out of range. Okay, so for the trend graph now, we need to set up something. It's kind of a two-part process. So we set up our data logging in our Multiview Explorer, and then we add a data logging or a trend graph object to the screen to actually view that data. So in our Multiview Explorer, we have a category down under the HMI section called data logging. So when we right click on that, we can add something called a data set. And we can have multiple data sets. And when we create that new data set and double click on it, it brings us to this data set creation window. So most of these are fairly self-explanatory. Do we want to store it in the SD card? Do we want to store it on a flash drive in the USB port? Do we want a custom folder for our data logs? Do we want this logging on a condition, or do we want it on a regular interval? So I'm going to leave everything default. I think 5 seconds is good for tank level. And finally, the start new database file. So this one you do need to be a little cautious of. If you started a new database file after 7 days and there were 357,000 data points in it, it's going to take a long time to open up in Excel. So I like to stick with the default of either doing it daily or the default 1,000 per log. The HMI will give it a file name that indicates the date and time. So they are fairly easy to chronologically sort through when you are looking through the data log history. Now, the window down below, this is where we set up the tags that we want this data set to log. So we'll click on the plus down here at the bottom left, and we'll add a tag. And the variable that we want to trend is our tank level scaled. And it's pulled the data type and the comment from our global variables. Now, when we add a tag to this, that means it's going to be trended at this interval automatically based on the way we have this configured, at least. Whether we choose to display that on a trend or not is irrelevant. This will be logged. It will be saved in a CSV file on your memory device. Now, you may or may not want this displayed. Sometimes you have so many points being trended that it's kind of messy to display them all. So we've added our tank level scaled. Now we can go to our set point screen, and we can go to our toolbox, and we can add a trend graph. So I believe that's in HMI controls, yeah, and trend graph. So we'll drag and drop trend graph onto our set point screen, and we can resize it a little bit. And now in trend graph, we have to do a few things, really. You can customize these quite a bit. I'm going to change the title. It says trend graph at the top. I wanted to say something else. So in the properties, I'm going to give it a name of lift station tank level, since that's the only data point that's going to be displayed on this trend. If you want to tweak your colors, feel free. Now, it's going to ask us for the data set, which is what we created in our Multiview Explorer, and we just left the default data set 0. So we'll choose data set 0. And below that is both analog and digital traces. So we can trend analog and digital values. I'm going to add an analog trace, and it's going to bring up a pop-up here, the analog trace setting pop-up. And I'll click on the plus sign, and the variable, the only variable that I can put in here is a variable that exists in that data set. So in our case, that is our tank level scaled. And the name we want to give it is going to be tank level. And that's what's going to be displayed on the right-hand side of the trend. The scale association, we can use the left scale or the right scale. So if you had variables on the same trend which use different scales, you could pick a scale for them to position themselves off, and you could pick a color. I'm going to choose blue because it's mostly water that's going to be in that tank. And you can see in the background, you can see what that color looks like on the dark background. So yeah, we'll pick that. We aren't going to give it a marker. No, we need to have an underscore in our name. So same as if you were creating a variable, similar syntax rules there. Once you're done that, you can close out of the analog trace setting. And that is how you will trend your tank. Now, conveniently, this one had a scale of 0 to 100. We can also control the time base that's displayed. If this is torque on a motor, you probably want to look the last minute. If this is a tank that takes a really long time to fill up, you'll want a longer viewport length. And where we configure that is down in time scale. So the default is 1 hour. I'll stick with that. That's fine. Now, simulating won't show a trend. I do have an HMI that I'll show you what it looks like on. But if you're running your simulator and you're wondering why there's nothing on your trend, last I checked, that didn't actually get displayed as part of the simulation. So, okay, we have one more page to go, and that's going to be our help page. Anybody have any questions so far on this screen before we jump off?
You're going to send a complete project out at the end of the day, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So on our help page, I'll get everyone to go to their toolbox and standard controls. We're going to drop an image on our help page. And we're going to select an image from the student material files that I handed out. So we'll open up the file browser and we'll pick the fake company logo. We'll place that here on the help page. In your toolbox, it's under standard controls image, and then in your properties of that image, we'll just click on the 3 dots next to the image file to pick it. Then we'll go back to our toolbox, and in the buttons category, we'll grab a generic button, the first one at the top there, and we'll drop it up in the top left somewhere. We'll make it a bit bigger, And we'll change the text, make it a bit bigger. Maybe not quite that big. The first one we're going to throw on here is going to be a PLC datasheet. Now, if you recall, our buttons need to be assigned actions, and you should still have the Events and Actions tab available to you on the right-hand side. And what we're going to assign as an action this time is going to be a click action, and it's going to be show document full screen. Now, the document file name, again, we're going to click on the three dots to the right of the drop-down, and that will bring up our File Explorer. And in the Session 2 folder, we have HMI documents, and we have our NX1P2 datasheet. I think you guys actually created an NX102, but I mean, for a training example, we'll stick with the NX1P2 datasheet as our selected document. And then we're going to open up or have the buttons available to open up a few more documents. So we have our PLC datasheet. I'm just going to copy and paste this button. Then we'll have our HMI datasheet. We'll have our PLC manual. And I haven't assigned the animations yet. I'm just putting the buttons down. And then finally, for fun, we are going to have a pizza button. Now, following the procedure that we use to assign a document to the first button, so Events and Actions, Show Document, we are going to pick the documents that are relevant to the other buttons that we added, and they're all in that folder. I'm sure you can figure out which one goes with which button. HMI datasheet is the NA datasheet. The PLC manual, I don't think that actually made it into the student material, it looks like, so we can delete the PLC manual. I forgot to attach the PLC manual, sorry. I think it was a little big in size. And for pizza, we have a document in there called menu, I believe. Yeah, we have a menu for pizza. So everyone can fire up their simulator.
Can I ask a quick question?
Okay, sure.
So those documents, we're pointing to them on our PCs. If we were developing these screens, where would these be loaded into the HMI so that it wouldn't be trying to access a computer that it's not always in contact with?
That's a great question. Yeah, so any document or video or image that you add to your project becomes part of the project file, and it's stored with the project directory or the SMC2 file if you were to work directly from the file. So yeah, if you exported this project and emailed it to a colleague, all of these documents, all of these images are going to be included with that file. So you don't have to worry about a broken link somewhere along the way.
Cool, thanks.
Now I said I'm going to have a VNC demo. So I have this project, well, a very similar project to it. It's actually the one we worked on last year for these sessions. I have this loaded on an HMI beside me here, and I have this on VNC viewer right now. There are a couple small changes in it, but it's pretty much the same. But this is the VNC viewer of a live HMI. So the things that I wanted to show you guys were the trend, because you can't simulate the trend. I haven't changed this tank level in quite a while, so it's just a straight line right now. But if I modify the value in the PLC, it will make this trend rise or fall. And you can also see the file name at the top that it's currently writing to. We'll just I'll modify the tank level. Might take it's got a 5-second update rate, but the display window might not show it right away. Yeah, so you can see it here now. I lowered it and you can see the dip on the trend. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you on VNC was when you open a document in your simulator, I believe it just opens your default PDF viewer. What it looks like in the actual HMI, and I'll just open up the pizza menu here. It opens up a pretty full-featured PDF viewer, so you can zoom, you can pan, you can scroll. And when you're done with ordering your pizza, you can close the menu at the top right. Same thing for the data sheets. They're going to look just like they would in your PDF viewer. So at this point, if you're having any issues, feel free to speak out. If you want to fire up your PLC and HMI simulator, play with some of your tags in the PLC to simulate your lift station, you can go ahead and do that. We are right at the end of the session, so I'll stay on for another 10 or 15 minutes here if you have any questions. If you need to jump off, you're more than welcome to play with this simulator at your own convenience.